Hi, and welcome to this short webinar by Consortium on service user involvement. So we'll be taking a brief look, firstly, at why to involve your service users, then the different types of feedback that you can gather and the methods of collecting that feedback, and lastly, reporting your findings back to your service users. So let's start by taking a brief look at the benefits of service user involvement. Well, your service users or members will feel much more engaged and connected if they feel listened to and they can see that their ideas are being put into practice. It's also important to ensure the services you are offering actually meet your members' needs. And this is particularly relevant if your group has been running for some time, because the initial needs that you were addressing when you set up your group may well have changed over time. So it is really important to check in at regular intervals with your current membership to make sure you are meeting those needs. And lastly, service users can often come up with really creative ideas to barriers. So things that perhaps as an organisation, as a team, you're struggling to come up with solutions. If you open that issue out to your members, they may well come up with an idea you hadn't thought of. So another important benefit of service user involvement is that grant funders quite often ask questions such as, how have you involved your community in developing your project? And how do you know there is a need for this project? So demonstrating that you have actively listened to your service users is a really excellent way to respond to these types of questions. So when you're preparing funding bids, obviously you can evidence need including national and local research and statistics, and they are also extremely important, but these can be strengthened by including your own research with your own local membership. So the types of feedback that we can gather from our service users fall into two broad categories. So we've got quantitative data, so that's numbers, anything that you can count or measure. So statistics gathered from surveys or ratings on a feedback form. And then we've got qualitative data, so that's people's experiences, their stories, and this can come from things like interviews and case studies. When thinking about how to gather information from your service users, do keep in mind that the different methods of collecting feedback may attract some people and put other people off. So, for example, a focus group and forums may attract those people with really strong opinions and confidence to speak up. A written feedback might put some people off who aren't confident in their writing skills. So there's going to be methods that kind of appeal to particular types of people, which may slightly narrow the feedback you're receiving. Therefore, it's really ideal to try and use a range of methods to involve as many of your different service users as possible. So thinking about ways to involve your service users, we're going to take a brief look at a number of different methods. So focus groups, public meetings, we're going to look at feedback forms and suggestion boxes, surveys and questionnaires, case studies, service user forums, and service users as trustees. Let's start off looking at focus groups. So this is a facilitated discussion with a group of participants. Some guidelines to make sure a focus group runs effectively. Do make sure that you have clear questions to ask, so there's a real clear remit as to what you want to gain from the focus group. And before you start, agree ground rules to avoid chaos. If you have a number of people, for example 5 or more, it can be difficult with everyone wanting to have their say. So ground rules such as one person speaking at a time, or perhaps agreeing a time slot, so everyone will get 3 minutes to have their say. But it's thinking about how best to agree ground rules before you actually start asking your questions, so that you don't have a really chaotic meeting. Also try to avoid leading questions, because you want your group to be able to be honest and talk through their experiences. So a leading question might be something like, tell me why it's so amazing coming to our group. Well, people may not think it's amazing, and they may have come to your focus group to give some feedback because they want some improvements. So a better, more neutral question might be, can you tell us your experiences at our group? Or can you tell us why you come to our group? Do make sure you have someone to take notes, capture the key themes from discussions. It's difficult if you are the person facilitating to also be the note taker, so it is helpful to have that as a separate role. Another thing that may help is to record the session, so you're not having to scribble down the notes as it's happening. But if you choose to do that, you will need people's permission, and you'll need to explain how that recording is going to be used. So thinking about the pros and cons of different methods of involving your service users. For focus groups, we'd say they're a really great way to obtain detailed qualitative information. So those stories, those experiences really come through in focus groups, but they can be difficult to manage even when you've got the ground rules in place. And they can be time consuming to then unpick the information that you've captured. So the next method we're looking at is feedback forms, and these can provide a really quick and simple snapshot. It can be very useful to gather feedback following a specific event or a session or perhaps a longer programme, or as a way to obtain ongoing feedback using a suggestion box, which we'll look at shortly. So feedback forms, again, thinking about the pros and cons, they're helpful in that they can provide both quantitative and qualitative data, and they capture immediate feedback. They can take time to review, however, and it can be problematic deciphering people's handwriting. So let's just take a look at a couple of examples visually of what a feedback form might look like. So as you can see with these couple of examples, they're all very brief and simple. It can be helpful to have a number scale and to be clear to indicate what's a low scale and what's a high scale. So we've included the sad face and the smiley face here, and also a space for people to write a brief comment. So that way you're capturing the quantitative number and also the qualitative experience. The example there on the bottom right is helpful if people have English as a second language or not confident in writing skills. It's just a really simple visual that they can tick to show how they found the experience. The feedback forms can also be used in an ongoing way using a suggestion box. So you can invite your members to jot down suggestions and literally post them in a small box that you have available in your venue. This can also be a useful option if you have a very specific question you'd like feedback on. So for example, you might be launching a new service and you want members to help come up with a name for the group. That's a kind of ideal way to make use of a suggestion box. So thinking about the pros and cons, it's a great way to obtain ongoing feedback, but it does require some management. So you need to have a system to regularly check the box and also respond to suggestions. Otherwise, people will stop using it if they feel I'm just posting my ideas in the box as I've been asked to and nothing's coming of it. So it really does need to be managed as an ongoing process. So next we're thinking about surveys, and this is a relatively quick and easy way to get your members involved. And there are lots of free tools online such as SurveyMonkey that allow you to create an online questionnaire, and of course there's also good old-fashioned pen and paper. Do think through what information you're seeking to obtain and do trial the survey before sharing it across your membership. So sometimes a particular question you've thought of, you may have a very clear idea in your mind of what information you're asking for, but when you trial it, you discover it's interpreted differently, or the feedback you get isn't what you were expecting or wanting. So it is really important to trial it. Also with the online tools, there's various functions to allow you to have one tick box with from a multiple list, or to open it out and say you can tick as many of these answers as are relevant, but you need to make sure those functions are working properly. There'd be nothing more frustrating than sending out a survey and discovering that people can't answer it in the way that was intended. So thinking about the pros and cons, again, like the feedback, it does allow you to gather both quantitative and qualitative information, but from a larger pool of members, because particularly with an online option, you can get it out not just to those physically attending a session, but out to a broader membership. On the negative side, it may potentially put people off if it looks too long or there's too much writing. And I'm sure some of you may have experienced yourself, if you go to click on a survey, particularly where you see the little percentage complete bar at the bottom, if you've already spent 10-15 minutes and see that you're only 5% into the survey, a lot of us just kind of click escape and exit. So do make sure it's not too long and there's not too much writing involved, so that you're not putting people off. So we're looking now at case studies, and these are a written description of the journey that a service user has travelled. So that literally means from the starting point, when they came to your service, they were maybe experiencing particular issues, or they had low confidence, or they didn't have a network of friends. And then over a period of weeks or months in accessing your service, you're able to then explain and demonstrate their journey and where they're now at. So they may now feel more confident, they may now be speaking to other people in the group, they may even have volunteered to support your group. So it's showing that person's journey from their starting point to where they are now. And you can ask your members to write their own story, or you can co-create the case study with them, or if they're not confident with writing skills, you can perhaps talk it through with them and then summarize it in writing, read it through with them, make sure they're happy with that final story. Often, if you're presenting these on a website, promoting the work you do, or you're including them in a funding bid, do get the person's permission, checking whether they're okay for you to use their name, or you might want to use a made-up name or anonymise completely. So in terms of strengths, a case study provides a really great detail of qualitative information, but it can be time consuming to complete for multiple members. So if you're wanting to demonstrate impact across your organisation, doing maybe sort of 20 case studies would take up a lot of time. So one compromise is to think about doing some form of quantitative feedback through a survey and having 1 or 2 detailed case studies that can really bring those statistics to life. So for example, if you're reporting that say 95% of people who've come to your social group have increased their confidence, a case study to actually show how someone's confidence has increased in a practical sense can really bring that 95% statistic to life. We're going to take a look now at service user forums, and we're going to look in a little bit more detail because there is more involved in setting up and running a forum. So it's a great way of developing a much more formal way for service users to get involved at a strategic level, but as mentioned, setting up a user forum will require a greater level of commitment. So that's in terms of time and costs, including staff time to coordinate the forum, and there might be costs, for example, potentially for room hire for your meetings, staff time for follow-up actions, administrating the group. So it is more involved, but that is why it then pulls out the more detailed input from your service users. So as with any new project, do discuss it with your colleagues, with your board of trustees, and determine if you have the capacity to proceed. So if you've decided that you do have the capacity and you want to go ahead and set up a service user forum, there are a number of factors to consider before you start inviting members to get involved. So let's firstly take a look at membership and things to consider. So for example, will you have a maximum number of places on your forum, or will it be open? And if it is open, do you have the capacity to handle the situation if, say, for example, 30 people turn up to a meeting? So if you decide that you do want to stick to a maximum number of places, you'll then need to think about how you're actually determining who receives those places. So there'd need to be some form of application process, and potentially need to think through how you discuss that with your members, how that might impact if someone applies and doesn't get a place. So it does need some time to think that through. You also might want to consider, are you seeking individuals from different backgrounds? So for example, a rep for people of colour, a trans rep, for example, or is it again going to be open and you see who applies and then perhaps determine roles once the forum's in place? Do you want your members to serve for a specific period of time and then perhaps need to be re-elected? Again, if we go back to the first point about the number of places, if it is a fixed number and it's an ongoing rolling membership, there isn't a specific time period, then potentially that stops new people from being able to get involved. So it might be helpful to think about having a particular time period, so 1 year or 6 months, or if you're running youth services, it might link to the school academic year from September through to July, and then perhaps having a new period where people apply. And then with that in mind, can members apply to join at any point, or will you have a specific recruitment period and which then closes and that's your group for the period that's been set? And these are just some of the questions. There might be other things that relate specifically to the nature of your group, but it is really important to spend the time having a think before you open up the recruitment to your membership, so you have a really clear notion of how things are going to run. So coming on to recruitment, it is helpful to have a brief outline of the role so that your service users know exactly what is expected of them, particularly with regards to their time commitment. You know, are you meeting monthly, weekly? Will it be in the evenings, in the daytime? So people are clear from the outset before they want to get involved. You might wish to ask members to actually apply to join the forum. But remember, it's not a paid job. So if you do have an application process, make sure it's brief and simple. And do consider different ways that members can apply to increase accessibility. So for example, if you think a written form might put off members, could they perhaps submit a short video clip? To get things up and running, schedule your meeting dates for your forum and do stick to them, because your members will soon lose interest if meeting dates are changed or cancelled, because they will rightly feel that it's not a priority. So it might be that you want to schedule perhaps 3 meetings in advance and then review, but do make sure you stick to them. And in that first meeting, use the opportunity to find out how members would like to get involved, as well as sharing your ideas, and then agree on the forum's specific roles and remits. So again, in that very first meeting, it is helpful to talk through with your members how the forum will operate on a practical level and collectively agree some ground rules. So things you might like to consider together and agree is the meeting timings, so what time the meeting will start. You might have a little kind of social period of 10-15 minutes, and then the meeting starts officially at a particular time, when the meetings will end, and whether there's going to be any break times. You might want to have a think about how, as a group, you will communicate outside of the meetings. So will there be email sent or group email set up, or contact by text or phone? Agree collectively the best way to stay in touch, particularly if there's actions that need to be followed up outside of the meetings. Another thing to consider is how and who to inform if members cannot attend a meeting. So if for whatever reason they're unable to come, they know exactly who to get in touch with. And also what happens if a member just doesn't participate, which can happen, that someone's very enthusiastic at the start of the forum, but then for whatever reason it just isn't able to make the meetings, or forgets to come, or doesn't respond. You need to decide collectively as a group at what point someone is considered no longer part of that forum. So is it if they've missed 3 meetings in a row, or is it, you know, a longer time period, or are they given kind of email opportunity or phone opportunity to discuss? Kind of agree collectively what processes might be put in place if someone just doesn't seem to be engaging. You'll also want to consider the remit for the forum and the areas that the forum will get involved in. These are a number of examples, there are many more, and your group may come up with their own list, but just some suggestions. They might contribute at trustee meetings or board of director meetings. You might have individuals or subgroups taking a lead on particular areas such as fundraising or planning an event. Service user forums often act as ambassadors to welcome new members to your group. They can contribute to funding bids. And as we said at the beginning of this webinar, in terms of input for grant applications, getting your service user forum to provide feedback on your existing services, as well as feedback when you're developing new services. If it is agreed that your service user forum will get involved and contribute at trustee or board meetings, then there's a couple of factors to consider. So agree the specific times the forum members will join. Obviously, it may not be appropriate for them to attend the entire meeting, particularly if there's confidential matters being discussed. They have a very clear idea that they're coming for a particular section, and that often works best either at the beginning or following a break period, so that you don't have forum members kind of arriving in the middle of a discussion point. Do ensure that there are clear agenda items relevant to the forum. It can be very off-putting if they're just kind of sitting in a trustee meeting, not really sure why they're there, don't quite know how or if they should contribute. So have a really clear agenda that's specific questions for your service user forum. And do ensure that any confidential meeting information is not visible. So your sort of broader trustee or directors meeting, if you're discussing confidential matters, make sure any papers and minutes are put away before the service user members arrive. And with that in mind, only share minutes of the meeting they attend if it's appropriate to do so, or it may be that you share minutes just of the section that they have attended. Do keep in mind that forums attract a certain type of membership, so individuals with strong opinions and those with the confidence to speak in front of others. And as the purpose of the forum is to obtain service user views from across your broad membership, you will need to consider ways to ensure that it is genuinely representative. So one way to achieve this is to actually task the forum with engaging your wider membership. So for example, consider using a mix of other methods that we've looked at. So for example, a survey and a focus group, and then task the forum to take a lead on these. Lastly, in relation to service user forums, it's important to think about incentives. So if you've set up a forum, do you want to keep those members motivated? They're supporting your group, they're likely strengthening your grant applications and helping your group grow and develop. So what are you offering them in return? And this is often similar to volunteer schemes. So it might include, for example, references to support study or work applications, thank you events to acknowledge and celebrate their contributions. You might be able to provide an internal certificate of attendance, or you may actually be able to link into a wider accreditation scheme. But just think about different ways of thanking your members and keeping them motivated. So we've come to the last method of involving service users that we're looking at today in this webinar, and that's a formal trustee role, providing your organisation is with adults 18 plus. This is a really positive way of ensuring your members' voice is represented officially at trustee and board level. However, the role of the trustee is very specific with a clear remit and responsibilities. So any individual recruited to your board must have a clear understanding of what they're undertaking. It can be helpful to look at a buddying scheme. So if you have service users who would like to get involved at trustee level, but it feels quite possibly over-imposing or nerve-wracking, it's a very formal space to be in, it might be that you have a buddy scheme where a long-standing trustee can help that person settle in. You might invite people to trustee meetings as a sort of initial view, so they can get a sense of how it operates before they make a final decision. To access our trustee toolkit for further guidance on the role and duties of trustees and developing an induction pack. We're going to take a brief look now at reporting your findings. So it is really important to share your findings with your members and any actions being taken forward. So your members will soon lose interest in providing feedback, coming to your focus groups, filling in your surveys, if they don't ever hear what came of it. And this includes letting members know if actions can't be taken. So do be honest and open with regard to actions. You may find that members don't really have a clear understanding of the cost implications associated with delivering services, or indeed the time frame. So if you've agreed with your group they're interested in setting up a new project and you've said, yeah, we're going to go for it, we're going to try and get funding, they may not realise that funding could take 4 months, 6 months for the application to be considered. And they may in that meantime just think you've forgotten or not bothered. So it's really important to be transparent in what you're doing and how you're following actions up. And it can be just so helpful to share this with members so they start to get a better understanding of how things work, and then they'll fully understand and appreciate why they couldn't have that, residential pride float and a new building all at the same time. You'll need to think about how best to actually provide that feedback, and this may well be linked to the way in which your members have been involved. So, for example, if you do have a service user forum, it may just be that you keep them informed during the regular meetings via minutes. You have a specific place and space to give those updates. But if you've had members get involved more broadly through a focus group or particularly through surveys and feedback forms, you may want to make an announcement, although that may only reach people physically attending the session. So it could be that you also announce via your website, via social media posts, through a newsletter or a notice board. And as we said at the beginning of this webinar, service users often come up with really creative ideas and solutions to issues. So do ask your members, they may have other ideas of ways in which you can share your feedback and report your findings. We hope this has given you a brief insight into the different ways to involve service users in your organisation. For further support, consortium members can access a range of resources on our website, and you can access support from our engagement team. And if your group is not a member of consortium, do get in touch or visit our website for more information.